Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Wrc webinar. I am now going to do our house rules and I will hand over to our facilitator, Mandla. I'm going to share my screen. Morning, everyone. Once again, welcome to our Wrc webinar, launch of the Wrc 2019-2020 Water Innovation Report, the Wrc-Tia Water Seed Fund. Our housekeeping items request that delegates only make use of the video function when speaking. Remember to look at the camera, not the screen. Mute your mic if you're not speaking. Use the chat to post questions or raise your hand to share any ideas and engage in our launch. Wait for the facilitator to call on you or unmute your mic. Presentation will be made available after the event. And this is how you access your webinar question. See at the bottom of your screen, there's a block that says participants, and next to it is Q&A. Any questions related to the event, please post them there. Any panelist members will then respond to it live, or then they can type them. And then the other one is the chat box, where I've already asked, said morning everyone, we can carry on introducing each other. That's how you can access that one. This is our program for today. I'll just pause for 1 minute so that people can have a look at it before I hand over to our facilitator, Dr. Mandla Msebi. Over to you, Mandla. Thank you.
Colleagues, a very good morning to you. My name is Mandla Msebi. I'm from the Water Research Commission. I'll be doing the facilitation for this event today. But first, I would just like to welcome you all. I want first to thank you and appreciate your being here with us today. And I'm very pleased on behalf of the Water Research Commission to be able to welcome colleagues from the Innovation Agency. I want to specifically welcome Mr. Patrick Krapi, who is the acting CEO of the Innovation Agency. I would like to welcome, I hope he's here, Diane Naidu, the head of Natural Resources Business Unit. I would also like to welcome Ms. Chembani Kupane, who is the program manager for the Tia Seed Fund. I believe we also have colleagues from Ahang Bokamotso Farms, which we normally call AB Farms, Mr. Mohale Maleka and Mr. Tumelo Pule, who are co-founders of AB Farms. South Africa is highly ranked in the world for its contribution to published research. Research related to water and wastewater. But the benefits of such work are not achieved by these contributions alone. We need to translate this world-class research into innovations that address the current and future socio-economic challenges that still face our country now and in the near future. We recognize water innovations as critical to identifying solutions for addressing the systematic water challenges and interrelated socio-economic transformation. But that requires concerted effort from government, the private sector, and civil society to build a robust innovation ecosystem. Although South Africa has been developing innovative technologies in the water sector for decades, in fact, next year we'll be celebrating 50 years of the Water Research Commission leading that space. With many of these innovations being adopted globally, the country still faces significant water challenges. Major funding and partnership commitments are still required to make the impact we so desire. The Water Research Commission and the Innovation Agency Water Seed Fund is therefore a right step in the right direction. The success of this initiative should be sufficient to prove to us all that investment in such is the right choice. It is therefore my pleasure to welcome all of you colleagues to this launch and hope through this launch and this brief introduction, we'll be able to whet each one of us appetite to invest more in water innovations. Thank you. With that said, colleagues, we are ready to receive the keynote speaker who will provide an overview on the potential of innovation to address the world's water and sanitation challenge. And that will be Mr. Desigan Naidu, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Water Research Commission. Can I hand over to you, Mr. Desigan Naidu?
There's no sound coming from you, Mr. Desigan.
Desigan, we can't hear you.
Yeah, we still can't hear you. Manda, I think he left the group. The meeting is gonna rejoin again.
Okay, let's give him a few seconds.
Hello, colleagues. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear.
I'm very sorry for that. Let me begin again. Colleagues, greetings to all of you, and in particular to Patrick Krappi and the Tia team. We are delighted that you're on board, and we're looking forward to this venture. So to kick off, I think we need to remind ourselves of what the extent of the challenge is that we're currently dealing with. You know, on the one hand, we are dealing with COVID-19, and a very big part of what we have to engineer very quickly, as we have been doing over the last couple of months, is the kind of management response to the COVID pandemic, so that we have a containment, firstly, because that's absolutely critical, but also an ability to organize ourselves into the realm of finding real solutions to the pandemic. And then in the longer term, to have the right kind of surveillance programs that allows us to very comprehensively and in real time know what the state of play is. And I think we sit here as two institutions, as part of a collective, a constellation of public sector institutions that are already doing extremely well in this regard. With the WRC, we have had big interventions around emergency water supply. We've accelerated parts of the sanitation program because these are absolutely key to the containment of the epidemic. And then beyond that, we have organized ourselves to make major contributions in South Africa and in Africa around information flow, because information is and has been absolutely key to the ability of people to contain the epidemic. We only have to look across the waters to places like the United States to see how critical that is, to have a single messaging system to make the system work. So we very proudly are able to say that we have produced materials very early in the process, in March already, that have been converted and translated into many languages locally, as well as the major African languages for use in the continent as a whole, much to the gratitude of many of our partners. But managing this pandemic needs serious innovation. And one of those points of innovation that we have been investing in, and you will know this, is the wastewater surveillance program, the COVID-19 wastewater surveillance program, to create macro environmental indicators of the pandemic, to do three things, actually. The first of those things is to organize as a triage mechanism in order to pinpoint where the on-ground intervention needs to take place, and that's absolutely critical. The second is to organize ourselves to have a heat map of the country as a whole to see exactly how the pandemic is progressing. And the third part is around the effectiveness of the interventions that we currently have around the lockdowns, the interventions around the coming vaccine program, the interventions around the therapy programs. So we map out the pandemic in that way. However, one of the critical things to do in cases of emergency is to minimize the sunk cost, naturally. And this is also part of the innovation. So the sunk cost comes in when you have an emergency intervention that you can't really use again. And we have to say, during a pandemic, there's a lot of that. What we've been trying to do in the water sector is to try and organize for those to be the building blocks of the future water system and the future sanitation system in the country. And I think we have been fairly successful around some of that, and we're working fairly hard to try to get to the other parts of that. And this is where this partnership becomes absolutely critical. The second domain that we need to talk about outside the pandemic is dealing with the fact that in the world as a whole, we are not doing as well as we should be doing with regards to the SDGs. Now, we're not far away from the midpoint of this program, starting in 2015, looking to 2030 as the point where we have universal access to water and sanitation for all the peoples on this planet, and in a way that the SDG 6 agenda actually empowers the other agendas of the Sustainable Development Goals. And here I think it's quite critical to mention that the interconnectedness between the SDG 6 and in fact all of the other goals is something that we have to pay particular attention to. One, we have to draw from the innovation from the other places in order to enhance what we do in the water sector. But two, we have to design our interventions in the water sector to empower all of the others as well. Now, one very critical thing that has come up in this domain is that this lag of South Africa, this lag of Africa, this lag of the world as a whole around the progress with the SDG agenda is, of course, very troubling. It's increasingly troubling given that we have had a 15-year run from the year 2000 to 2015 around the MDGs, which, if you like, was the first step of the SDGs. And it is true that we should be a lot further along this road than we currently are. It is also true that as a country, South Africa is not doing very well. In its own self-assessment report that the presidency submitted to the UN system in 2019, South Africa had claims around a much lower level of coverage than we had imagined that we would be by 2019. But more importantly than that, in the global review, South Africa actually ranks only 10th on the African continent with regards to progress with the SDGs. So this is a really big challenge. So a lot of our effort is associated with what the UN itself has instituted. And the UN itself, recognizing the challenge around the world, recognizing that the challenge has, in fact, affecting more than 95% of the countries in the world, has organized itself to launch a catalytic program. And that catalytic program is the decade of action between 2020 and 2030 to try to get us much closer to those targets. And a core part, the driving force of the global decade of action is, of course, the Global Acceleration Framework. And the Global Acceleration Framework has organized itself into 5 fundamental pillars. The first of those pillars is governance, because the governance mechanisms around water in a country, between countries, and at very local levels is quite complicated. And organizing for a governance regime that actually facilitates implementation in a much more accelerated way is badly needed. And we know this story very well in South Africa. A second pillar is around financing, around the availability of resources in order for these programs to run. And here again, we are looking at innovations even in the financing mechanism, because we know that the conventional mechanisms have serious difficulties. In fact, a core part of what is bringing us together in this relationship is talking about the possibility of very innovative mechanisms and step up mechanisms in order to organize ourselves to have a resource flow that is quite open, quite vibrant, and in a way that organizes for its own sustainability. And I will return to this point a little later. The third of those pillars is capacity. Now, this is one of the old pillars that operated in the MDGs. It operated even before the MDGs around the development of the Rio program, all the way from Rio to Johannesburg and then back to Rio again, where we held the World Summit on Sustainable Development. Capacity is absolutely core. But capacity has to be looked at in quite a different way going forward, because we're not looking anymore at the conventional capacities that you need around managing water and sanitation. And yes, you need some of those cores, and you will continue to need those forever, but it's quite clear that you have to expand the capacity to organize into many other domains that we previously have not stepped into the domains around financial management, into the domains of behavior management and behavior nudging, into the domains of marketing and communication, into the domains of artificial intelligence and big data, as we try to organize intelligent systems going into the future. The two remaining pillars are in fact new. The first of those pillars is innovation as a pillar, innovation with the big I, around the understanding, and this is really important, that using the conventional systems that we have been used to thus far, in water, in sanitation, in agriculture, in energy, in fact, in every sector, will not get us anywhere near the target that we're looking for in 2030. In fact, midway through the MDG goals, Jeffrey Sachs and Calestis Juma, folk that I am sure that our Tia colleagues know quite well, did a review of the progress of the MDGs on the African continent. And their conclusion was, without new science and technology and innovation, the African agenda around the MDGs, and the MDGs were halving the deficits, remember, not going to universal access yet, not dealing with the last mile yet, that the African agenda, in the absence of new science, new technology, and innovation, would take 143 years rather, to reach that point, as opposed to the 15 that was allocated at that time. If you take that same algorithm and you transpose that into 2020 and look at the SDGs, where the SDGs are looking at total access, not halving the deficit, but total access in a sustainable way, you can see that the 143 years can grow really exponentially. It is for these reasons that innovation has organized itself to become one of the core pillars inside the system. And then the last is, of course, engaging the possibility of getting the benefits of the fourth industrial revolution into what we're doing, and that is around big data and information. It continues to astound me that there is some discussion in certain parts of our country, in certain sectors, that talks about the fourth industrial revolution as an aspect, as something that is still coming up. Well, colleagues, you and I know, Tia and the WRC know, that we are living out the fourth industrial revolution as we speak. You and I know that we are not doing anywhere near as well as we should, that we are in fact organizing ourselves to be at the wrong end of a potential 4IR divide in the world, in spite of our tremendous efforts. And the thing that is particularly challenging for both the Tia and the WRC is, in spite of this wonderful repository that we have developed over the years, and while Tia is a new institution, the WRC actually celebrates its 50th year of existence in 2021. We sit on 50 years of incredibly good research, incredibly good knowledge, incredibly good know-how, and to some degree, rather good innovation. The difficulty that we're having is the classical difficulty of trying to traverse that innovation chasm, that valley of death around organizing for the valorization and the scaled up use of these toolboxes in order to build a better society, and where possible, to organize for commercialization and the development of a much more vibrant private sector. And this is crucially important. In fact, yesterday, when Minister Nzimandi joined us and the UNDP to actually launch the WRC UNDP partnership, and we used the occasion to actually congratulate the first 7 awardees, the winners of the challenge that we had put out, the innovation challenge that we had put out around water and sanitation. He made some very important remarks that I would like to paraphrase and remind us of. The first is that he talked about, he didn't use these words exactly, but he talked about this relationship which constructs a diamond. The relationship that organizes for academia, industry, and civil society to be key corner points of that diamond. But he also talked to the concept of the one government approach. Now, you listen to Minister Nzimandi a lot more than we do because you have much better access to him. I'm sure that you have heard him talk about this before. And the thing that he points to is not only government organizing itself to have a coordinated and synergized and value-added approach to its initiatives, but it is incumbent on all of the state institutions to do exactly the same. So this relationship that we have with the Tia organizes for us to get a lot closer together, understanding that while we are separate entities, as indeed we are in fact in that family that needs to operate in a way that gives confidence to the academic partners and the industry partners and civil society in general that we have a high reliability index, in particular because we are coordinated and synergized. And I think we must explore that. The second issue that he raised is that we have to have a paradigm within which we work. And that paradigm he talked about as the goal of the just green transition. And this resonates very, very well with the WRC. Because in the WRC, we talk about building back better and building back not only from the pandemic, mind you, the pandemic is recent, but building back from almost 12 years now of constrained growth because we haven't really recovered from the 2008 financial crisis. This is true for many, many countries in the world, of course. But we need to build back and we need to build back better. But we're saying in addition to that, we want to build forward greener. And now using the words of Minister Nzimandi to organize for a just green transition of the South African economy. The third issue that I want to pull out from his speech, which I thought was very important, was his own recognition that innovation is everywhere. It is not only in the institutions that have this as part of its mandate. It should be in all institutions, both formal and informal. We have a collective duty to continuously comb the landscape, to continuously mine these gems that are out there. And, this is something we have discovered repeatedly. If one looks at the Toilets Grand Challenge, the Reinvent the Toilets Grand Challenge that the WRC led a few years ago, we found tremendous innovations around new ways to organize ourselves to deal with sanitation. And at least 1/3 of them came from institutions that you would not associate with research or innovation. And many of them, very interestingly, came from people's own initiative in their backyards and in their garages. So this notion that innovation is everywhere is something that we want to internalize, we want to appreciate, and we want to develop a strategy how to continuously harvest what is already out there. But more than that, as public institutions, we have to go one step further. And we need to be organizing to nurture the innovation spirit that is out there through our various support systems, through our various programs, through our various campaigns, because we need to organize for these 1,000 flowers to grow, because only then are we going to be able to accumulate the best bunches. So, colleagues, as we move forward, the thing that we need to be thinking about very strongly now, and this is why the seed fund is absolutely critical, is the recognition that water and wastewater and sanitation, over and above dealing with the epidemic, the pandemic, over and above organizing ourselves around the platforms for reaching the SDGs in a reasonable enough way, not too far beyond 2030, but the tacit recognition that water, wastewater, and sanitation are core components of the President's reconstruction and recovery plan. One, because water security and a hygienic wastewater treatment system and a dignified sanitation system are baseline requirements for any kind of investment, both local and international. And we recognize this, and we have to work hard on that. But over and above that, we have been able to demonstrate that there are incredibly good industrialization opportunities associated with how we deal with water. So to use one example, we've been working for many years on acid mine water, AMD, and organizing ourselves around different solutions with that. We made some incredibly good inroads, the WRC, with our international partners around getting the science right. And more recently, we have a Tia project that has been announced that has taken that particular set of partners who have benefited from the WRC work as far as the research is concerned, and taken that into the demonstrated domain supported by the Tia, and hopefully that will become one of the mainstream new solutions around dealing with pollution in the country. Dealing with pollution in a way that produces water as a byproduct that you can use, and some very, very valuable minerals and chemicals that come out of the acid mine water. And this is incredibly important. So colleagues, we are looking to this partnership with great enthusiasm. It is indeed a very modest start that we're making, because the seed fund that we're talking about is quite small. But the very big and more important thing is around bringing two institutions much closer together along the lines of what Minister Nzimande talked about as the one government approach, so that we can pool our resources together, we can pool our thinking together and our innovation together and our minds together to come up with much, much smarter ways of going into the future. And I'm hopeful that when we reflect on this in 10 or so years from now, we will recognize the important contributions that we are starting to make, because we will be able to see then that water and sanitation and wastewater and the way we deal with it innovatively actually become mainstays of the economic growth model of this country, of this region that we live in SADC, of this continent as a whole. So program facilitator, I thank you very much for the opportunity to offer this message. And colleagues from Tia, we are looking forward to bringing two networks together in a most powerful way to make a visible difference to the landscape. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Jess, again. Thank you for highlighting the importance of new science, technology, and innovation in the African agenda, and that without it, it will take a long time for us to reach or achieve any of the goals that we have set. And also the fact that innovation finds itself being at the core pillar in the science system. With those comments, and again, thank you, Desgan, we are ready to listen to Dr. Valerie Naidu, who will take us through the framing of the Water Research Commission's Water Innovations Report and implications for the sector. I hand over to Valerie.
Thank you, Mandla. Yeah, so I'm just going to give a brief background in terms of the annual report that we produce, which is the Water Innovations Report. And we've we've done this report for many reasons, and I hope at the end of this, you start to understand this report really is a building block around engagement, and let's have the conversations on how to take some of these innovations forward. So what is the purpose of this report? In many ways, it's about understanding the demand and the needs and the segmentation. And the reason why we want to understand the segmentation is really around what are the support strategies that we as the WRC, with our networks, with our partners, can afford the innovators, the SMMEs, the universities, such that they can take it forward. And these strategies can include positioning, investment, brokerage, of course, influence. The bottom line is whether it's TIA or the WRC, we're all working towards either whether you use the terminology return on investment or we're looking at impact. So we have to make a difference in the world and we have to show that difference. And the Water Innovations Report is a good starting point. It's an annual report, but our real aim is to actually cast a report and start to do some trend analysis on a multi-year space. So the way the report is structured is within the WRC, we fund R&D. Within the various tech accelerators like WADA and SASTEP, we fund various innovations. The whole idea is the different KSAs, whether they are KSA 1 and 2, which is water resources and ecosystems, water use and waste management, which is linked to the water services space, and water utilization in agriculture. They produce clusters of projects and innovations that give us either sustainable solutions, either develop products and services for economic development that we can move forward, or they create lots of tools, frameworks, decision support. And this, in many ways, is either going to go into developing human capital within the water institutions, in the water and sanitation sector, or to empower communities. And when we say empowerment in communities, especially around what I would call innovations, we're talking about empowering entrepreneurs, empowering SMMEs, empowering communities, NGOs, to take the knowledge, whether they monetize it or create very smart social entrepreneurship models. The whole idea of this report is to encourage that development with the outside entrepreneurship base. I'm just going to give you a few examples of why it's important for us to actually have this report. So as you understand, I mean, we do a lot of applied research. So here's an example from one of the cases where they are looking at a prioritization tool. Now, if you understand clearly, we did an analysis and audit with SANBI, and they found out that many of our wetlands were compromised. In other words, they were in critical states. So this prioritization tool allows both CMAs and other parties to actually then be able to invest in rehabilitation. Now, of course, where do you want to put your money? And a tool like this allows you to make that decision. Now, this is sitting at a TRL 6. And so within the WRC as well, we ask ourselves, if we want to invest in this, who's going to take it up? Is it going to be the Department of Water and Sanitation? Is it going to be the CMAs? Could it be private sector that is willing to use their CSI budgets to rehabilitate, maybe adopt a wetland kind of system? So in this space, it allows us to have a discussion with various partners and bring in investment, bring in scale-up opportunities. But herein also lies the opportunity for SMMEs to engage, for them to take the tools forward, for us to be able to increase the coverage, the replication, and the scale-up of some of these tools in the sector. Another example, for example, we often speak about climate change. And when we speak about climate change, we talk about droughts. But we also know in certain parts of the country, we will start to see more intense flood hazards and risk. And so if you look at this, this is developed off a university. They've taken it up to Tech Readiness 8. But the question then becomes, so who takes this forward? Who owns this? Who do we hand it over to? And I think this is the broader discussion of this document. It starts to ask the really important questions, and it allows the WRC with its partners to then engage, but it also allows partners to engage with us. So if there's a company out there that's willing to take this knowledge forward, or if there is a training institute that is willing to take this tool, train all the municipalities, then that's the conversation we should be having. Why is it important? Well, because the amount of damage floods can do to infrastructure, water and sanitation is enormous. And so it's important for us to then understand how to use these tools to plan for the future, to be more prepared, to allow us to mitigate when disasters arise. So the value in terms of some of the innovations that are being created is enormous. The third one I'm giving you is because, again, this is an example of what I call the traditional way in which WRC positioned innovations previously and where we are right now. So this is quite a young technology, TRL5 from the University of Pretoria. They're looking at small rural scale desalination. So why is it important? South Africa at the moment, from a water security point of view, we've essentially run off trying to use all of our surface water. And so we're starting to use more and more groundwater. But a lot of our groundwater is brackish. A lot of small coastal towns also have run out of water security options. And so in that space, we're looking to either desalinate seawater or brackish water. And the question is, how can you do that effectively? So here's a technology. And typically what would happen in the water sector is we would create the know-how, and that know-how would go into the institutions. But now we are offering the opportunity for commercial partners to come on board, translate that know-how into an actual product and be able to sell it on to partners in the water sector. And that dynamic has to grow and be strengthened in order for us to get more return on investment in terms of some of the solutions that are out there, and as well as basically be able to provide more solutions to the municipalities. Here's another example where in the actual document, things are a little bit more clearer in the sense that they were trying to create food security, nutrition, and productivity for small farmers. As you know, there's a large amount of our population that basically lives off the land. They are smallholder farmers. They are linked to livelihood farming. And here the science is able to provide them with high yielding pest-resistant legumes. It's a TRL6, and this is very clear in terms of there needs to be training, and then we need to roll it out at scale. The question here is who partners with who? So as the WRC, we've produced something, it has real tangible benefit. So how do we partner with other people to either make it into a viable commercial case? And I say commercial in inverted commas because every transaction is commercial. So whether you're an NGO that's taking training to small farmers, that's a commercial transaction. You'll either do that transaction with the CETAs or you'll do the transaction with the provinces. But by doing that, you are able to create more businesses that are able to take viable solutions to the market. So those were just some examples that are in the WRC Innovations Report. And the Innovations Report allows us as the WRC to start asking the right questions in terms of how do we support these innovations further into the market. Now, the segmentation that we currently have is knowledge products and tech transfer products. And the knowledge products, these can be taken either directly by the institutions like DWS or Environment Affairs or various entities within these national departments, or it can be taken up indirectly, as I stated. And that indirect uptake of knowledge is a transaction for a consultancy company or an NGO, or even universities that are offering part-time consultancy to the municipalities in terms of advisory and support. Now, from tech transfer, that's a little bit different in the water sector in the sense that if we know a product can be commercialized, then it's easy to work with the TTOs or work with the companies and try and understand, is it a startup that we're supporting in this space? Or is it better to license that product out if there's a patent on it? And I think these are all the little things that we're starting to engage a little bit more in the WRC. And of course, where we start to see real major challenges, we start to put more emphasis around how would we face that challenge. And I think the CEO gave a good example, which is the sanitation, the off-grid. And the idea there is that you actually could not transition without trying to understand how to industrialize off-grid sanitation solutions. And that requires a far bigger discussion with a multiple level of partners in the space. So the WRC report is giving us the kind of insights and information which allows the WRC to position ourselves with our partners and networks to take the technology forward. And we go even, I would say, a step forward in terms of trying to understand, how do we analyze this portfolio? Do we understand where do we want to put extra money from the WRC in? Where do we want to bring our partners in so that they can co-invest or co-fund with us around the big issues? So you'll see on the McKinsey's 3 horizons, the WRC portfolio, we spend a lot of time investing in innovations that can be used in the short term by institutions, by communities, etc. But we also invest to some extent in the Horizon 2 type innovations. And that requires a lot more long-term kind of structuring of funding and understanding where the market is going and how we actually move into that. It requires policy interventions. It requires various discussions with regulators, etc., before you can start to open that space up for the market to actually start to expand. I've given you an example of KSA3, which deals with the water services side, and you'll start to see in the KSA3 space, for example, they spend a lot of time looking at what are some of the circular economy technologies that can be used. In some cases, it's low value circular economy products, but you require higher volumes. They look at products and services around how do we put in interventions for water sensitive design so that we become more water secure. They look at more around the apps and the devices that can be used in that space. Again, building blocks in the digital water world, building blocks in the 4IR world. We have to get the systems right in order to move these things forward. The individual innovation is part of a family in this 4IR discussion that we're having. And of course, on the 3rd horizon, we're looking at these high value circular economy type products. And if we're able to crack that, then essentially you are moving into more sustainable spaces. And you're also moving into space where you now can actually take waste and design it so that it can have a market value. You can transform that waste into something of value. And of course, we're also looking at, as I discussed earlier, around the high value products of the next generation sanitation products. So you start to see how the WRC is starting to engage with the universities and the thinkers in terms of bringing in new innovations in the space, how we cluster, how we work with partners, and then how we try and bring in the crowdfunding around these big initiatives that, by the way, requires a whole of government or one government approach if we are to crack some of these big challenges in the innovation space. I think I put this slide in because we did an audit a while back, and we're very aware as the WRC that the NSI is there, and we have some really good examples in that space. But when it comes to tech transfer offices, especially in the water space, we know that there's some work to be done. There's some partnership building and relationship building to be done there in order for us to take some of the investment that we put in universities into spaces where the uptake is increased and the commercialization is increased. So in that regard, I mean, as the WRC, we're well aware of what needs to be done, and we will continue to work and try and keep stimulating and encouraging the commercialization of our products. So I'm going to basically, this is my second last slide, and all it's saying here is that as we produce these annual reports, we're continually engaging around how this portfolio is changing and using different methodologies and approaches to try and understand, where do we invest? Why are we investing there? Is there critical mass around those innovations that allow us to take something that allows a real shift and change around economic growth in the sector? And I think with that, all I'm going to say here is that we see this healthy portfolio in the WRC. We're also seeing that we have a good pipeline of projects, both in terms of Horizon 1 to Horizon 3 type innovations. And we've started to grow the space a lot more. And we're also seeing the sector react to this in a very positive way as well. And I think with that, I'm going to say thank you. And I hope that you continue to engage with myself and my 2 team members on the Tech Transfer Office, who are eager to chat with anyone that wants to see how they could monetize, take some of the products forward, or create a healthy relationship in terms of how these innovations can be taken into the water sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. And also just the emphasis on the point that we have a number of pipeline projects that colleagues need to take note of as they listen to the presentation. But also linked to a question that has been asked, there's no need for an answer now, but think about it. It's been directed at the previous speaker, Desigan. Thank you, Desigan, for your keynotes. In my experience, organizations such as the Wrc and Tia have done incredibly well in funding the initial stages of innovation tech development. However, in South Africa, we have challenges in adoption of the technologies and getting our communities to use the solutions. In your view, how do you overcome this? And I believe, Valerie, you have addressed this question in your presentation, but if there is extra information you want to share with Charlotte Mashaba, you can do that via the chat box. Thank you. With that said, I just want us to launch now the Wrc-Tia Water Seed Fund. Get ready for a video that is going to play now. Tobile, can you play the launch video? Thank you, Tobile. This is it, colleagues. This is the report, and it's available from the Wrc website. You can download the report there, and it's truly a worthwhile document to go through and identify key things that you can engage with. The CEO, when speaking, he emphasized the importance of partnerships that will help us take these technologies forward. Thank you. Now we are ready to receive Mr. Thabo Mtombeni. He is the Technology Transfer Manager at the Wrc, and he's going to speak on the purpose of seed funding and the objectives of the Water Research Commission Tia Water Seed Fund. Thabo, over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Msibi. And thank you for everyone in attendance. I'd like to thank and welcome our CEO, Mr. Desigan Naidu, and the acting CEO of TIA, Mr. Patrick Krappy, as well, and all protocol please also observed. Thank you. My name is Thabo Mtombeni, and I will be managing the TIA WRC Water Seed Fund for the water sector. As we begin, The Water Research Commission of South Africa and the Technology Innovation Agency are launching a water seed fund of up to 200,000 Rand per project, which will be made available for innovation-oriented projects from higher education institutions, small and medium enterprises, and any innovator in the water sector as well. The objective of this seed fund is to seed activities with the intention to develop innovations into investor fundable opportunities. With this seed funding, the WRC and TIA hope to increase the rate of commercialization of water-related intellectual property generated from the South African research and development fraternity. Now, when we look at the Water Research Commission, our mandate and primary function is to promote, coordinate, cooperate, and communicate in the area of water research and development, establish water research needs and priorities, stimulate and fund water research according to priority. And when we look at the Water Seed Fund, we come to the mandates of promoting effective technology transfer and of information and technology. Now, the goals of the Water Seed Fund are firstly to train, advocate, and support potential entrepreneurs. Secondly, is to promote an entrepreneurial culture in our country that encourages risk-taking, acceptance of failure, and also celebrates business success. We also want to promote contact between entrepreneurs and investors across the South African water sector. We want to remove bureaucratic and legal obstacles to entrepreneurship and the investment thereof. We also lastly want to promote investments in SMMEs as a means to support positive economic recovery and social impact across South Africa. As the CEO alluded to, we really need to promote and improve the economy of the country. And this is one of the instruments that will be used to do that. Now, the Water Wrc-Tia Seed Fund, its purpose is to assist innovators, researchers, and SMMEs from an adjusted grant funding from between technology readiness level 3 to technology readiness level 8 to develop, validate, and understand the underlying market, and also test technological assumptions, and almost get to a point where they can demonstrate some of their technologies. The objectives of the seed fund are to assist higher education institutions, science councils, individuals, and SMMEs to advance their research outputs, to also develop prototypes, proof of concepts, business plans, which could be also used to attract further investment. Part of the objectives is definitely for institutions to attract follow-on funding from other institutions such as TIA, the IDC, PIC, and any other funders in the water sector that can actually improve or grow the technology readiness level, either through commercialization or through industrialization funding. Also, the objective is to demonstrate the value proposition to commercialization partners. Now, the Wrc-Tia fund, the funding parameters are very simple. However, first of all, the kind of funding instrument here, it will be a grant fund, and the investment amount will range between 1,000 Rand to a maximum of 200,000 Rand for each funded innovation. The funding period generally is, according to the TIA program, is about 12 to 18 months. However, at the WRC, we will also be open to funding institutions or innovations between 6 and as well as 12 months, although we've put 12 to 18 months there. Own contribution or co-funding will not be required, but if an innovator has got funds and requires more than 200,000, they're more than welcome to use them. Expected financial return, it's a 0 on grants. However, if it was a conditional grant, Tia has actually stipulated that we've got 2%, there would be a 2% royalty amount on such a fund of grant. Now, the rights which you actually get from this are that you have the right to participate in further funding rounds, and there will be no securities involved in this. Now, what are the fundable activities? First of all, initial proof of concept is fundable. Prototype development is fundable. Sourcing of intellectual property opinions is fundable. Production of market samples or market research reports is also fundable. Refining of and implementing of designs is fundable. Conducting field studies, support on certification activities. For instance, for a lot of the innovations in the sanitation realm, they require a lot of SABS, South African Bureau of Standards certifications, and this fund would actually allow people to access funding for such activities. We also fund a little bit of piloting and scale up, but I would actually like to say in this reign that we've got other instruments for piloting, demonstration, and scale up at the WRC. The WADA platform is one of those, and they've got a huge pot of funding for actual piloting and demonstration. And as well, we've also got R&D funding from our R&D unit, which deals with this. So we will not really be concentrating a lot of funds on the piloting on scale up, since we've got other funds that already deal with that. But we will be funding definitely techno-economic evaluations, detailed primary market research, and the business plan development. What we will not be funding under this program are salary contributions, early stage research projects, and in that I mean any project between technology readiness level 1 and 2, which are usually at the idea stage. We will not be funding ideas. We want to see some sort of proof of concept, or it's been proved in the lab. There has to be progression of actual activities. We will not fund equipment, working capital, and general operational expenses. So the Wrc-Tia Seed Fund has got a funding criteria. For someone to access the funding, they have to be a South African citizen or have permanent residency in South Africa. There must be a strong alignment with the WRC mandate and the water sector needs. As mentioned before, it must be beyond basic research. There must be proof of concept and up to pre-commercialization. We also fund things that have further technology development, which must be performed and must comply under the Intellectual Property Act of 2008. What we're saying here is that we would like all the work undertaken to remain in the borders of the country. We would like it to benefit the citizens of South Africa before we even think about taking the technology elsewhere. So there must also be a competitive advantage. For instance, you must have almost an IP protection strategy. There must be a strong potential for commercial opportunity. There must be a feasible business model. We also look at issues around transformation and redress. That is previously disadvantaged individuals. BE is an input in our adjudication process. And a good team or company composition to execute the project and possibly the business is also very important in our adjudication process. And one of the most important is the potential for high socio-economic impact. That is, does this project address the national imperatives? For example, issues such as job creation, which are really facing the country right now. Now, this is just a spectrum of the funding journey. And under this, we can see where the WRC Seed Fund will be playing. Although people must not look at this just simplistically and say, oh, maybe I'm in a university, we will not have a startup. What we are seeding is new innovations, things that have not been used before. So we will be actually starting up on the seed fund, and the other instruments and the other institutions are involved in the other phases, such as growth, sustaining growth, maturity, and so on. You've got IDC, you can public list, you've got venture capital firms that we all expect to actually participate after our round of funding. Now, this is my second last slide, but in this slide, I want to say there will be a call, and which will be released in early January, and there will be an award of up to 200,000 to support pre-seed and seeding activities, with the intention to develop innovations into the next stage of investment opportunities. So with that said, I'd like to say thank you to everyone, and please, we will be sending out this call to all the stakeholders, everyone who's attending this meeting. It will also be advertised on the WRC website and all other platforms. Thank you.
Thank you, Thabo. Thank you, Thabo, for the clarity on how to access this funding. And I was trying to see if there are any fresh questions being asked. Okay, there's one question, Thabo, before you step off. When is the call coming out?
So the call will come out on the 15th of January, and it will be open for a period of a minimum of 2 weeks, but we expect it to be open for about a month thereafter, and then adjudication will take place, and we hope by the end of, or the beginning, the end of February, we will be actually giving out the grants and informing those who are successful.
Thank you, Thabo. Thank you, Thabo. And colleagues, there you have it. The fund will be, the call will be out in January, mid-January, and be ready to submit your proposals. We're gonna hear now a presentation from Mr. Mohale Maleka, who is the co-founder of AB Farms, and he will talk from an innovator's perspective. We have heard so far from a founder's perspective how these challenges are being dealt with. This time we are going to hear from an innovator's perspective on seed funding. Mr. Mohale Maleka, I hope you are ready. Can we have you, sir?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Msibi, for having me. And thank you for Tia, as well as the WRC for hosting us today. And good morning to everybody watching as well that's present here. So my name is Mohale Maleka. I am a co-founder of a company called AB Farms, which is an agri-tech company that provides hydroponic solutions to commercial and emerging farmers. I've co-founded the company with my partner Tumelo Pule in 2017. Both of us are mechanical engineers from UJ. And so just to give a brief introduction for those who don't know what hydroponics is, hydroponics is basically farming without soil. So it's a farming technique that's less intensive in terms of water inputs. It uses about 80 to 90% less water per crop, depending on how the system is managed. It also uses less land as you introduce vertical farming. So in the rest of my presentation, I'm going to be talking about our developmental journey as a business, where we came from, where we started, where we are now, and where we hope to go in the future. I'm also going to be talking about the seed funding and its importance to that developmental journey, as well as the follow-through WEDA funding that we've received in our developmental journey, as well as the importance of seed funding instruments in general to startups and small-scale businesses such as ours. So just to begin, this is a typical hydroponic system. It's called an NFT system. And what's happening there is you have water flowing in the system. The water's got nutrients and the roots are dangling in that water. And as the water flows, you've got the roots absorbing those nutrients and the plants growing. So one advantage of this farming technique is because you're not farming in the soil, you don't have to worry about the condition of the soil where you're farming. So if it's non-arable land, it's okay. In the event of urban farming, for instance, there is no problem. Even if there's concrete on the floor, it's still fine in the case of urban farming. So this picture that you see on the right of the screen was our initial system. We built this system to get an idea, a technical idea of what hydroponics is and how it works, and some of the advantages and disadvantages of this technique. And there we've got lettuce growing, it's fully grown. And then on the right, you've got tomatoes growing there. And then these systems work in a similar fashion. So after we built this system and we did some market research around all the systems that are available on the market, we realized that all of them have one flow, including the system that we had built, which was they all require water to flow through them continuously. Now, this is a problem because in South Africa, we've got interruptions in terms of our electricity and water supply in some areas. We all know about load shedding. So that tends to be a big problem in this sector. So myself and my partner, this is the picture on the right, we came up with a design to counteract that problem. So our design, the product that we designed solves the problem of if you use our product, you don't have to have consistent water supply just by virtue of the way it was designed. And then because of the way that it was designed, also it increases the farming density, so you can fit more crops in less space. And how it works is the product mates one on top of each other and then one back to back to form a tower of plants up to 6 meters high. So this is vertical farming. And then you have the towers next to each other to form one row. And then you can have the rows parallel to each other to form a system. Now it's also modular in its design. So you could have 1, 10, 1,000, 10,000, or even up to 100,000 planting spaces, depending on your requirements. Now, the market relevance of hydroponics and our system in particular is it solves the problem of feeding an ever-increasing population with finite land, energy, and water resources. And then also in the case like Gauteng, for instance, so we have a high urbanization and no farming land. These sort of systems enable farming in urbanized areas. So in terms of the seed funding and its importance, the picture that you see on the screen is a prototype. It's the initial prototype that we had, and we used this to do some visual inspections around the product to see its dimensions, the thickness, does it work properly, do the units mate into each other properly, is there enough space in the root zone, is there enough space external to the planter to have a head of lettuce growing and spinach and other crops. And then once we were happy with that, we did another set of 3D prints. So there was a second prototyping where we grew the crops. So the picture that you see in the middle of the presentation is about a 3-day-old head of lettuce that was planted. And then on the far right, you've got a 4-week-old lettuce that's ready for harvesting. So these prototypes were funded by UJ Peats, which is a Tia tech station, and together they formed our proof of concept, which we were able to go then approach the WRC with these in hand, as well as other presentations to present our case. And then that led on to follow-up WADA funding. And what we did with the WADA funding was we started by optimizing the design for manufacturing. So the images that you see is an optimized design that's cheaper to manufacture than the previous prototype. We've also changed the way that they made into each other. And then we also, with the WADA funding, also established a limited manufacturing capacity for the demonstration site. And the picture that you now see, the tool, it's called a tool, it's a mold. It makes the manufacturing parts, and the part that is being made currently in the picture is the base. So it's the bottommost part in the bottom of the middle picture. So that's what we've done with the WADA funding. And then the next step in the WADA funding that we're busy with is the construction of the demonstration site. We will be using this limited production to produce about 10,000 parts to set up a commercial scale demonstration site, where we'll be using the site as a pilot site, as well as a research and development site post-project, and then also as a marketing tool to demonstrate to further customers, to potential customers. So then I'm going to wrap up talking about the importance of seed funding in our journey as well as in general. So in our case, the seed funding led directly to the WADA funding because we had seed funding already. When we approached the WRC, we had proof of concept in hand. It was easier to explain. They could see it, they could touch the product, and that made it easier to present our case. We also had proven that it works at a very, very small scale. And then the second thing that both funding instruments have provided in our business is that they've created equity in the business. So now when we are negotiating going further into industrialization, we're not just a startup with a great idea or a startup with some proof of concept. We've got a demonstration site that we're busy constructing. We have a limited manufacturing capacity. So going forward, we'll be negotiating from a position of strength as opposed to a position of weakness. And then another important factor of these funding instruments is it gives credibility to the startup. Since receiving the UJP's funding as well as the WADA funding, when we're going out to present our case to potential customers, to other institutions for partnerships and further funding, it gives us credibility. When we go and say we're AB Farms, but we're funded by these two institutions, it's easier for us to open certain doors that without being attached to these institutions, we wouldn't necessarily be able to open to. So another thing that has helped us is these institutions have provided non-financial support in terms of expertise. So for instance, in the case of UJPs, the design around the product, so the heating and cooling instruments in the system, how do we integrate solar energy to take it completely off grid, those technical questions and solutions, we've been working together with the UJPs to strengthen our technical case. And then in the case of the WRC, in the initial stages, they provided an IP search for us, where they looked at the landscape of the IP to determine if we're not infringing on anyone's patents, and if there is a position for our IP within the current landscape, and how we can go about protecting our product from an IP point of view. They also provided us with a business a marketing research, where they just checked the landscape in terms of hydroponic markets, and they did a competitor analysis for us to determine who our competitors and where they are and what they do and how our product is different from theirs. And all of these things have strengthened our business case as AB Farms. And then another thing that another contribution of these funding instruments is that it expands our network. So in terms of UJPs, we have met actually 2 institutions who are potential customers now. Just after we've built the demonstration site, they would be interested in buying from us. And then in terms of the WRC, just by virtue of us being able to present into this platform, there are a lot of very important people here who we might not necessarily have access to had it not been for the WRC. So all of these are some of the important things that the funding instruments bring to fund and to support, which has been very useful to us. And then just as I wrap up, more information can be found on our website, www.abfarms.co.za. And we are on LinkedIn, myself, Morale Maleka, and my partner, Dumelo Pule. And then as I wrap up, I would just like to thank both institutions again, TIA and the WRC, for all of the support that they have provided to our business, and we are thankful that they have a union and a fund together to help other startup funds going forward. So I think that is my time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Maleka. Thank you for that. A very good demonstration what a real partnership can produce and what can happen to our country as such innovation can lead to new enterprises, job creation, food production, food security, and many, many other things. This is a very good demonstration. Thank you again, Mr. Maleka.
Thank
And
you so
again, colleagues, you can continue to post your questions either on the Q&A platform or on the chat. They will be answered as we go along. And now we are ready to call on the two CEOs, the CEO of the Water Research Commission, Mr. Desigan Naidu, and the CEO, the acting CEO of Tia, Mr. Patrick Krapi, to give us very valuable words of wisdom around these issues of partnerships and how they drive innovation, or they should be driving innovation in South Africa. But I think more important is for us in this gathering, colleagues, to appreciate the value of partnerships. I'll call upon the CEO of the Water Research Commission first, and he will use about 7 minutes of the time to talk about the value of partnerships. This again?
Manda, I wonder if we should do it the other way around. I've already had a chance to talk earlier. I think maybe I'll follow Patrick.
Okay, thank you so much. Patrick, again, you're welcome. Can you please take the podium and talk to us about the value of partnerships in driving innovations in South Africa? Mr. Patrick Krapi, over to you.
I'm trying to get my video on. There you are. So this chair of mine, it's a bit.
Yeah, the video is on.
Thanks a million, Manja. I honestly don't know where to start anymore, guys. It's like you spilled oil under my feet as I was walking, listening to just the great and exciting stuff that's going on just in the space of the research and innovation you are involved in. And Mokhale's presentation could not do more, I think, just to move me inside. As I say, I'm so lost for words. It is not funny, and I really, really mean this. So I think, first of all, to thank you, the WRC, for inviting us to this launch. Special thanks to Desigan. We are old colleagues, acquaintances, and friends in the space that we've worked in for a long time. Me and Desigan, each time we meet, it's always about how do we partner and help the water innovation system work better. That's always the center of the conversation. And he has remained, I think, a very staunch advocate of innovation in the water space, whilst the Water Research Commission was generally known in the past for being a research center, call it. But it has, I think, over the years, taken a much more, I think, stronger interest and action in the space of innovation. So I think with Desigan's leadership, I've just seen the Water Research Commission transform significantly into a big player. I see you now talking language called TRL6, TRL7. I was watching Valerie's presentation. I'm terribly impressed. We thought that this is language exclusive to Tia, and only us big guys speak this kind of good language. But it is clear that, I mean, you have come to master the art of the space. And for me, I think that's quite important. So with that said, colleagues, a few lighter notes, I think, once in a while we can do with jokes, right? Number one is that when I see your presentations on the screen, I'm trying to look for my Tia marketing and communications unit to say, guys, please, let's go get some technical assistance and learn from the WRC, because the way you produce your materials, it's really top class. And this is without patronizing in any way, but really, really acknowledging people who do things better than us. And I think we have a lot to learn from how you do this, the presentations, the succinctness of the information, and the reports themselves. So I'm going to send my marketing colleagues to come to you. And then the second part, of course, is one of a bit of frustration. These online platforms, they don't help us because as colleagues speak, as Desigan speaks, as Valerie speaks, I want to stand and join the standing ovation. But this can't happen, online. So this is the only part I miss about, these physical gatherings where we are able to stand and clap and acknowledge, I think, the good stuff that is coming out of the work that we are doing. So for me, I think that has been quite useful. You requested me to speak about the value of partnerships, and this is my life. Outside of my acting CEO role, my day job is partnerships. I've been doing this for many, many years since I started here, and the journey I've traveled with the WRC has been a long one. And I'm excited that today we're meeting to launch, in fact, formally, the partnership at a very concrete level beyond signature of an MOU. And I think for me that is important. We haven't shared with you where we are as Tia and what are we trying to achieve in the next 5 years. And I'll do that in the next 3 minutes. So I'm quick. I'm acknowledging that we don't have much time. Our strategy 2020-2025 covers 3 elements, basically. The first one, it focuses on intensifying our investments in the bioeconomy sector. And this is in part because the department, our shareholder, has identified that as a key area where they want to spend more of their money in terms of stimulating innovation. The second pillar, and this covers areas around health, around agriculture, industrial biotechnology, and more importantly, and the minister speaks a lot about indigenous knowledge systems. So those are the areas in which our bioeconomy team is really looking to invest more in, to stimulate innovation in those spaces. The second pillar of our strategy is really around enhancing commercialization. Now, when we say enhancing commercialization, this comes from the fact that, and Tia is misunderstood by many stakeholders. I do get frustrated when I talk to a lot of people, including our own shareholder, where people always ask us, what have you commercialized to date? You've been around for 10 years. We are currently going through an institutional review right now. And this is the question that is being raised. But the fundamental point is that in its last 10 years of existence, Tia's primary focus, and this arises out of its mandate as well, has been to stimulate innovation. In 2009, when we were established, we were a collection of entities that came into Tia, but the ecosystem was not as dynamic as it is today, such that the research output that we had at the time, there was little applied research, so to say, that was out there. There was little bankable innovations, or at least proof of concepts to invest in. There were no opportunities for prototype development. It was largely, the system has invested a lot in basic research and not so much in applied research. And Tia did have to do a lot of ground spade work to try and help deal with that chasm that we speak about, to invest in a lot of technologies, less about commercialize, but make sure that all of these things that are out there are sufficiently de-risked, such that they can attract follow-on funding for commercialization. So this had been primarily our focus of getting the system to function at maximum level of efficiency and produce bankable innovations that we can take to market. This explains why now, going forward, the emphasis of our strategy is now to say we are gearing up to now take these opportunities to market, not only those from Tia's portfolio, but those that exist outside of Tia's portfolio in the market, because the market itself has become so dynamic, or the innovation ecosystem has become so dynamic that it is now in fact on its own producing stuff without Tia's assistance. So our responsibility is now to make sure that there's traction of all of these investment opportunities that we put money into. So this is the second key element of our strategy. And in doing the commercialization, enhancing the commercialization, partnerships are key to that. And I'll explain a little later why I say that. The third element of our strategy, being the last, we've got 3 outcomes, is enhancing access for SMMEs to science, engineering, and technology support. This is the role that is a niche role for Tia. Why? Because there's a lot of enterprise development support by corporates, by other players, but none of these are or have the same level of capability at infrastructure level like technology stations. And Mohali has confirmed that can offer the kind of access to SCT support that people like Mohali requires to be able to produce a prototype of that planting equipment that is put. And this is really an area where, when we talk about enhancing access for SMME to science, engineering, and technology support, we've got 18 technology stations covering a wide range of sectors. PITS is one. And this is the kind of thing where we think there is a gap and there is a niche space for Tia to try and increase that. Now, of course, there's no money. Putting up one technology station is no less than at least 25 million rands. These are investments that the DSI has made over time. With the current budgetary constraints, it is unlikely that we'll be able to establish many more of these, but we have to look at other models of making sure that this happens. Let's talk about the strategic priorities. Now, the principles that inform our strategy are around, and Thabo has spoken about some of these. It's around transformation. It's around inclusivity, making sure that we are able to increase access to Tia support by people who are on the margins of society, who operate outside of your formal innovation ecosystems, and how we reach out to them. And it is through partnerships that we'll be able to pursue that. But around transformation really is really around increasing the participation of previously disadvantaged communities, individuals, and in particular, institutions. When Val put a slide that shows the IP that is being generated at different universities, I was looking at those graphs carefully. It was interesting to see that some of what we classify as previously disadvantaged institutions, in fact, seem to be dominating in the space of water research. So that was quite interesting. So I watched that with great interest. The issue around strengthening NSI support for SMEs development, it's really around dealing with the challenges of technology entrepreneurship. Mohali, you shut my mouth, quite frankly, and I'm sad that I see 2 people. There's one that is tall and the other one is short. So I don't know which one is Mohali between the 2. I hope I'll get an opportunity to meet you personally at the right time. From Tia's side, the challenge of SMMEs, aside of access to SCT support, is really around helping them to connect with investors and helping them to create viable enterprises. We have established one instrument in Tia, for example, which is the Industry Matching Fund. This has been pioneered by Tando. The Industry Matching Fund basically is a fund where we have partnered with selected venture capital companies. We have partnered with institutional investors like the IDC, the DBSA, CFA, and the others, who co-invest with us in interesting technology. So they count a lot on Tia to say, we want your pipeline of investments because you are the guys who know what innovation is about, but we will bring the money and make sure that these are taken to market. So it's an interesting instrument that we have deployed successfully. It leverages from different funds. It's one of the most successful funds, newly established in Tia, but it's seeing a lot of traction around that. In the middle of all of this, I think the fundamental issue around partnerships agenda for Tia is to deal with the problem that the DSI has raised consistently from the time of Minister Hanepo and Minister Pando, of fragmentation of funding instruments within the ecosystem. Sometimes entities competing instead of collaborating, and make sure that there is a proper relay system of handing over things from one support entity to another. And part of what we are doing basically involves that. What we have invested in as Tia over time, let me start with the bigger fund, which is the Technology Development Fund that's been managed by DIA, right, from the water sector. In this fund alone, colleagues, we've invested 80 million rands over the last 5 years or so in a number of technologies. The big ones are just about 6 of them. This would be a technology like Trailblazer, where we invested 14 million. Another one, Vulamanzi, 10 million. Another one, Algia Bioremediation Project, we've invested 14 million, and so on and so on. Now, these are big quantums. Of these 6, there's one technology commercialized, which is Trailblazer. It's doing some demonstrations with ESCOM and so on. But when you come to the seed fund, and this is where I also get a lot of excitement. The seed fund, so far, we've invested in no less than, I think, 60 technologies. More than half of that is outcome from research and development from the universities. The seed fund, we here in the last 5 years, just to give you in numbers terms, we have commercialized 114 technologies in the last 5 years. 80 of those are from the seed fund. Very small amounts of money, but producing profound results. And I think it's been one of the most well-performing instruments in our portfolio. The advantage with the seed fund is that we basically are accessing a network of implementing partners. Here is small staff complement of 214 people. We can't be everywhere in the country. But what is interesting is that we are also able to access the expertise of other institutions to be able to allow them to look for projects, to run the calls themselves like you are going to be doing, to do the assessment so that we don't pretend that we know everything, and allow ourselves, to be guided by people who know, as typically I would put it. And I think this has been one of the good things about our seed fund. The seed fund itself, outside of the Tia WRC seed fund, we have invested in 25 projects. Now, our current partnership, as Desigan said, the amount is it's a meager amount, start off at 200K per project. Now, outside of this and the seed fund on its own, we have invested in 25 projects, seed fund. Total value of 8.1 million rands, 25 projects. We have one of these commercialized, hit the market. Now, what is interesting is that just with 8 million rands, we were able to fund 25 projects. And it tells you, small as it is, but we are able to make very, very good investments in promising technologies. My colleagues do tell me that once in a while, they get the WRC to look at some of the projects and make suggestions. And some of these cover different sectors, waste, water treatment, purification, water saving devices, pipeline maintenance and sanitation. So, I mean, it's a diverse portfolio where we have made some investments. So what I think we probably need to think about is more around how do we deepen this partnership using the current seed funds. But before I get to that, maybe let me make one point, because we spoke about getting these opportunities to be adopted by the market, by communities, and so on. This is a very critical question. Otherwise, we end up dumping money in things that don't go anywhere. I'll leave this thought with you because this is an area where I think this will be our next move. I'm busy working with a colleague in Tia to establish what some of you may know is an internationally used instrument called the SBIR, Small Business Research and Innovation Project. This is an instrument started by the US a couple of years ago and widely used in Europe, where we get different government departments to set aside an amount in their annual budget in percentage terms, right? We can start small just to be able to fund entrepreneurs who develop innovations that respond to delivery in their main areas of mandates, fundamental. So basically that's what it does. Now we have the Department of Water Affairs and Sanitation. So perhaps we can have a conversation jointly with them to begin to help entrepreneurs who can access this. We've got the Department of Agriculture. I'm keen to know, Mohale, what is it that they are saying? There's no point making political statements about food security, talking vertical agriculture. These are policy pronouncements. But your technology gives a real expression to that. There's no reason why people in townships cannot be enabled to procure that which we have produced to make sure that people can plant their own vegetables in their yards. We spend a lot of time redistributing land, and I don't never know what happens to that. But let's find people who are interested in farming. They're stuck in cities, but in fact, you know, there's a potential uptake for that. I'm just raising this as a point of conversation outside of this. But the second thing is around now our Tia WRC MOU. The MOU that we signed in 2012 already in August covers a wide range of issues and it remains valid today. What we have as the launch of the seed fund is basically giving life to that MOU specifically, and I think we're on the right track. I'm happy I saw when you presented on the seed fund, Thabo, that you've really thought through all of this. We're good to go with that. You've defined objectives, you are clear on what you want. But there's certain uniqueness about this seed fund between us and the WRC, and I must boast about that. We have 35 implementing partners for the seed fund. The WRC will be the 36. You are the only one who's co-funding with us. Others are recipients and they just deploy the money and seek opportunities. That is, of course, has got its own risks and its own opportunities. But when you have a partner who's co-funding and you entrust that partner with your own half the money, you are sure that they have a vested interest in looking for the best in the market because they have a vested interest too. So this is the one biggest, I think, lesson that we are learning. And I think we'll use this model to partner with other people. But what I like most is that I wish that we had had this kind of session with the WRC as we were preparing our own strategic plan in Tia last year. Because I guarantee you that our strategic document, when it speaks about water sector, we would have been blowing the lights out based on the fact that we have adopted and accepted to work with people who know. The difficulty with Tia is that we manage different many sectors, and we can't claim to be experts in all of them. If anything, we should allow ourselves to be led by people who know. The WRC specializes in water, finish and clear. And this is what is it that we should be led by the WRC to say, these are the niche areas, guys. This is the problem statement in the sector. These are the areas in which we should invest. And I think we should allow ourselves to be led by that. For many years, I've also advocated that we get our WRC colleagues, and I was asking Daya, why is the WRC not participating in our investment assessment committee meetings when we evaluate water projects? And this has to be the practice going forward, but it's a conversation that we'll have internally. So colleagues, there's just so much that we can do together. I'm greatly excited, but listening to Mohale's project, we'll probably have to have a conversation because he has a good story to tell. I like the way you tell the story. I like the fact that contrary to, unlike many entrepreneurs, they can't give a simple, clear account of who gave me money and what did I do with that. The next one gave me this money, I did the phone. You give such a concise, clear account, and there's no confusion in terms of how you've utilized the money and what milestones you've achieved from each of the monies that has been provided. And for me, I really greatly appreciate that. And for me, colleagues, without taking too much time, I took all my time allocated to me and the CEO of the WRC. And do forgive me for that. It's only because of the passion that I honestly feel when I talk about this. But to our partnership with the WRC, I think the seed fund is going to be a great instrument, unique in its formulation. I would venture to say, as you implement this seed fund and the new core, I have mentioned that we've got 25 projects we've invested in through the Tia seed fund general with other partners on water only. So I will ask Sembani and Daya to work with you. Take these 25 projects, we map them out and say, how do we get these to be sufficiently de-risked, and how do we take this and map out their route to market? And Val has shown in her presentation that you've got the capability, you understand the kind of challenges that face these innovations in the water sector, route to market wise. So we require your assistance in that. So do not look at this initial amount that we've given as the work and it ends there. Dig out into the portfolio, analyze the portfolio, define a strategy in terms of how we take all of this to market. Thanks, colleagues. I'm going to stop here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Patrick Krappy. And yes, you really left us very much encouraged by your words and how you view partnerships. In fact, most of what you said, we're going to save it somewhere to use it when we hold our discussions with the CEO around performance bonus issues. Thank you so much. We truly appreciate that. I'll give Desigan Naidu just to sum up the value of partnerships in driving innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, Bala. I will be brief, colleagues, because I know we're a little bit over time, but it was useful to listen to Patrick. I actually recognize that I haven't for quite some time. I just want to make three very brief points. The first of those points is that Patrick will recall that I was part of the team that conceptualized this agency that eventually was called Tia. It started off as something called the Foundation for Technology Development. This is how it was in the first white paper. And at that time, one of the phrases that I used a lot when I was marketing this concept, because we had to develop a law, we had to take this through a cabinet, we had to take this to public consultation. We were talking about Tia being an institutional bridge to create a superhighway for the innovation value chain. Well, you know, I think I've modified my view since then, that there isn't one superhighway in this innovation value chain. It is in fact three-dimensional, and it's got a multiplicity of routes. So what we have to do is to revisualize our institutional partnerships as multiple bridges in a three-dimensional environment that organizes for an entire ecosystem. And I think it is a good challenge. And I think it is one that we will do quite well in, so long as we hold ourselves to understanding that together we're going to do more than trying to do things apart. The second is that it's very encouraging that water security, which came out of the NACI Foresight study, which the minister has now pronounced is going to be a key priority in the new decadal plan. Because I think that will empower the system, it will empower the institutions, and it will allow us to get a lot more investment into the domain of IP creation in the first place, so that we have in the innovation domain a lot more to be able to work with. And then the last point I want to make is that our working together in a coordinated and value-adding way is going to be super critical around building public sector confidence. And public sector confidence is a very, very core component around the overall reputation of the South African economy. In fact, more is weighted around the view, the global view of the public sector when looking at things like credit ratings than it is about the private sector players themselves. So I think, we have responsibilities over and above what sits in our business plans, over and above what is basically expressed in our mandates. And in order to do that, we really have to hold hands in a very, very powerful and very, very coordinated way. And I thank the Tia colleagues for the incredibly good staff they have given us today. And we're going to take Patrick up on the several things that he mentioned, with the promise that it resonates very strongly with our own ambitions as an institution, and we would be extremely happy to work with you and your team. Thank you very much, Manda.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you so much. And with that, colleagues, we're coming to the end of our program. And I'm going to call Dr. Valerie Naidu to give you the closing remarks. And from my side, I would like to thank you all for this wonderful engagement. We've learned so much about Tia, and we appreciate every speaker. We also appreciate the people who organized the event. They've worked so hard to put everything together. Not only those, the people who produced the report, what a wonderful report. We say to you, heads up. And for each and everyone who joined in, participated, I believe you have gained something, and your time with us was extremely valuable to you as well as it was to us. Thank you so much on my side. I'll hand over to Valerie to close on behalf of the program organizers. Thank you.
Thanks, Mandla. So I think I also want to say thank you to the guys handling the event, to Tembi for stepping up with the report, and for the marketing and comms team in terms of what they put forward. I think in terms of Thabo for working with the various partners in Tia in order to make sure that the agreement was signed and that we actually can launch this really exciting endeavor. And I just want to say thank you to both CEOs, I think, for supporting the initiative. When we started, we initially had bigger ambitions. We wanted maybe to look at some of the bigger technology. But I think as we start to look at the analysis that's going on, this sort of stimulation using small pockets of funds actually really does bring out the entrepreneurs, the real entrepreneurs, the guys that come with the novel ideas around how to enter markets and how to monetize products. And I think the seed funding is really a powerful instrument. And I hope that we're able to take this co-funding amount and then over time actually grow it in the water sector and stimulate, I think, transformation, young, Black, female. For example, on the WADA platform, we can see that we definitely have a deficit among female entrepreneurs. And so we'd like to stimulate some of those spaces as well. And so I look forward, colleagues, in terms of the seed fund being successful and for us to grow from strength to strength and create that bridge that allows our investment and your investment to be a collective investment for South Africa in terms of our growth pathway. So thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for participation. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.